and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. I am Daryl Grove, and I'm joined by the newest member of the Adam Lallana fan club. It's Taylor Rockwell. Hello there.
Hello. Yes, I got my official card in the mail. I applied very quickly. They're very prompt in sending it back.
I thought they wouldn't come until the very last minute.
Well, it just arrived moments before we started recording.
Just as you were about to give up.
Yes, and it arrived here, which is a good way to caveat to the fact that we are not in the office today.
We are not. So, yeah, we're going to talk about Slovakia, England, and US national team versus Trinidad today. And we would normally do that in the grandeur, the palatial TSS Tower. All 350 square feet of it.
There it is. Yeah, I feel like you're building that one up. And then if ever anyone comes to see it, they're going to be let down dramatically.
Well, it's if a palace was filled with acoustic foam.
It's to paraphrase Derek Zoolander, it's a palace for ants, put it that way.
So yeah, we are not there today because it's Labor Day weekend. We are recording remotely.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get into this game, Taylor.
And I think I'm pretty happy that we're recording remotely, I have to say, because it means there's less face-to-face, haha, I told you so's coming from your direction.
Because of the Lallana stuff, or because I told you that Sam Allardyce's England would be pragmatic and effective and would get a good 1-0 away win against Slovakia?
Yeah, pretty much all the above.
I mean, do you agree that this was a good win for England?
I do. I think people are going to, and I would say before people roll their eyes and start furiously typing in all caps on Twitter, I think it was a good result. I understand why people were frustrated. I know social media exploded by the end of that first half with how bored everyone was, how frustrated they were, how it was the same old England. But I think there was lots to take away that was positive.
Well, yeah, people need to know that away World Cup qualifiers in sort of Eastern European countries are not the circus, right? You don't necessarily tune in to be entertained like you're watching Russell Crowe fight a tiger. It more is just like you've got to go out there and get the job done.
Daryl, do you think
exactly what England did?
Do you think that circuses are gladiatorial combat? Because
I've sort of merged two things into one weird metaphor.
I was going to say, what happens in English circuses? Because that is terrifying.
We have Australians fight tigers.
Now I want to go to an English circus. I think
their visa.
I think you're right, though. If you look at it, I mean, this is the fixture that Sam Allardyce identified as the toughest fixture in qualifying. Scotland might like a word with him, but yeah, and then it's always going to be a hostile atmosphere. And if you look at that field, it was pretty much torn to shreds in the first 3.5 seconds. So not a very easy pitch to play on, not a very easy atmosphere to play in. And then a tough opponent that held England scoreless in the Euros only a couple months ago.
And I think the thing I was most impressed with, because I think I texted you at halftime saying, I like this. I like the defending here. Mm-hmm. I think England will snatch this, right?
Yep.
The thing I was most impressed with was how England went out and nullified Marek Hamšík, which is always the thing you've got to do against Slovakia. And Allardyce had a better plan than I had, which is, I'm always impressed when a manager's smarter than me. I like to have that confirmed that international managers are smarter than me.
Is that not a rare occurrence? Do you usually find yourself being smarter than the manager at the end of the game?
Well, okay, I'm going to take you back to the Copa America Centenario semi-final, where you and I had spent 40 minutes in the preview saying Klinsmann cannot go all out and try and pressure Argentina because we will get ripped to shreds. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. So basically, I feel like all you're trying to do here is remind us all that Sam Allardyce was a smarter England appointment than, say, Jurgen Klinsmann.
Oh, yeah, well, that wasn't my original idea, but yes, absolutely yes. Because he went there with a plan, and the plan was Eric Dyer sits in defensive midfield, like Kyle Beckerman-esque, and holds his position.
That's what he's always wanted to be described as.
Well, I'm just using that as like an American analogy,
yeah.
Right? So he holds in front of the back four, he sits at the top of them, and then Jordan Henderson follows Marek Hamšík around. So then you've got the channels blocked by Eric Dyer, and you've got the most dangerous guy man-marked by Jordan Henderson. And you can say that's kind of like a cowardly move because it's a very like defensive minded thing, but then it gives England the platform to then go and try and do something at the other end.
Well, and I would even take issue with that, because I would say you could say it was cowardly if it meant that you were like conceding space elsewhere and not trying to do anything else. But we knew going into this that Marek Hamšík was far and away Slovakia's number one threat. I'd say their number two threat wasn't even in this game. It's Vladimir Weiss. And so if you don't have him, if you can shut down Marek Hamšík, then Slovakia aren't going to get any opportunities unless, say, Danny Rose accidentally fails to clear a ball. I mean, really, the one time he gets dispossessed and they have that shot that goes across the face of goal, that's their only real opportunity in the whole game.
Yeah.
So it's clear that the defensive system, the defensive shape worked pretty perfectly.
Yeah, and everyone seemed really concerned about, say, John Stones dancing on the ball and all that. And he did have one moment where there's one too many moves and he got caught. But for the most part, every time Slovakia couldn't get it to Hamšík, they would try and like fire the ball into Duris, who was their lone striker. And Gary Cahill and John Stones, I don't know if you caught this, Taylor. I mean, because I always look for centre-back play. Mm-hmm. They were just managing to be stronger and faster and step ahead of him and take the ball cleanly.
Yeah, I mean, I was really impressed by them. I did enjoy that moment with John Stones because it was sort of, I play for Pep Guardiola. And then he got dispossessed and it was like, I'm English. And then just like swept the guy's legs.
He's got both things going for him.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, I do want to say that as well. It did seem like this was a team that felt more confident coming out of the current club season. Because Man City last season underperformed, so did Man United, so did Chelsea. Liverpool and Tottenham, both very pressing teams. So then you go into the Euros this summer, England not playing a very high pressing system, and then other teams, players kind of out of form. And I felt like, at least in the early stages of this game, you had John Stones kind of doing Guardiola things, dribbling out of the back, looking to play those passes. Raheem Sterling looked much more confident on the ball. So it just felt like a little bit more of an upbeat England. And then maybe that fell off a little bit as the half ended.
Well, it looked like a team that had a week to practice their game plan, right?
So you're getting back to the cancelled friendly? Is that where we're going with next?
I really think that's a brilliant move.
I agree, except for the fact that it still removes one opportunity for other players to play. So like Sam Allardyce said in the post-match press conference that he had thought about getting Jamie Vardy involved, but was sort of like, unless they line up the way I think they're going to line up, and then they did. And then there's basically no reason to play Jamie Vardy because you can't utilize his pace at all. And so maybe in a friendly against a team that lets you use that pace, then at least you get to see what Jamie Vardy can do, albeit in a meaningless friendly.
Because what we did attacking-wise, and we know what Jamie Vardy can do, that's the thing, right? But what England did attacking-wise is have Harry Kane go up against Skrtel and Duricha, and basically we just let him take a beating for the entire game until Martin Skrtel got sent off. Wow. And there was a part of me that wanted to see Jamie Vardy go up against him instead, because he'd be more elbowy than Skrtel maybe, and could maybe get around the back, but it turned out to be the right plan, because Harry Kane just ground them down.
I can't believe that he got a red card. Only because, I mean, obviously he earned it a couple times over. But, but just that, like, I've never watched a game more so, like, and felt more like, oh, he's definitely getting a red card, as though it was just, like, a thing that he does. Like, every now and then Martin Skrtel stops to, like, drink water. Like, that's what it felt like. It was like, every now and then he gets a red card. Yeah, it was just ridiculous. And then that he kind of had that, like, that grin of like, really? That was worth a yellow card? Come on. And then you show the replay and it's like, oh, I stamped on him once. Let me stamp on him one more time just to make sure I stamped on him the first time.
Definitely got to get him.
Goodness gracious, Martin Skrtel.
And that is where the game changed, right? When Martin Skrtel sent off, Slovakia are down to 10 men. Then England are on the front foot for the last, I want to say, 30 minutes or so.
Yeah. And I mean, and this is where I kind of gave you a little stick after the game when we talked, because you were like, I thought it was really great that once Slovakia had a man sent off, England really went for it. And I was sort of like, yeah, isn't that what you do? Like, don't you always do that when the team gets a man sent off? And I think it is worth noting that obviously that is what you do. You kind of smell the blood in the water. Or I guess you don't smell the blood in the water, but you see the blood in the water. You know it's there. You go for it. But I think by the same token, we've talked about how when you're playing a team that is a man down, it can be more difficult because you don't quite know what your assignments are anymore, because now players are in different spots, in different shape, and you have to adjust to it. And a team that hasn't played together very much can always struggle to adjust. And that England did, I think, is to their credit.
And I want to credit the players, obviously, but I credit Allardyce with making specific changes to capitalize on 10-man Slovakia.
Okay. Like, such as?
Are you ready for my little thesis?
I'm ready.
This?
Give it to me.
So, of course, to begin with, there was that Henderson tracking Hamšík and Eric Dyer sitting beneath, right? As soon as Slovakia went to 10 men, Hamšík no longer has that free role to go and like roam all over and cause danger. He has to go and sit in a 4-man midfield, right? It's essentially a 4-4-1 for Slovakia at that point. That means there is no longer any need to man mark Hamšík. Otherwise, Henderson would just be sort of marking a sort of more stationary left mid, right?
Yep.
So that's why you get Dele Alli in there instead, right? And then you've freed up a midfielder to go and join the attack. And then what I noticed is as the game went on and on and on, and we got into like the last 15 minutes or so, I saw England pick up the tempo, and I saw John Stones do what you were talking about, get his Guardiola skills out, and essentially step into midfield. He was my favourite central midfielder for the last 10 minutes.
You could see Sam Allardyce screaming at him and gesturing for him to get forward. So I think he took that verbal cue.
But I'm just really impressed with the idea of, like you said, blood in the water. And, you know, a lot of coaches might just say, all right, we'll take the 0-0. You know what I mean? Hodgson more or less did in the final game of Euro 2016 group stage. But instead, England went for it and got the reward for it. And, you know, it was a tactical shift. And also, a tempo shift. You could see the desperation of those England players to score and win that game.
Yeah, but is that in and of itself kind of a problem? That it's like you saw the panic? Because I felt like it was less like, hey, we've got this opportunity, let's take it, and more of like, oh gosh, we got to do something, otherwise we're going to hear about it. It felt a little bit like there were still those voices in the back of their heads letting them know, like, oh, you've made a mistake here. Because even, like, to go away from that goal for a second, like, Raheem Sterling, I was really impressed by. I thought he started really well. Let me say, I was impressed by him early. And it seemed like he, like, made a few little passes and a few moves that I was like, oh, he's feeling it. He's in form. And I texted you, like, I think he's going to score or get an assist. Because it seemed like the Raheem Sterling of old. And then he had, like, a miscue here and a bad pass here. And then it kind of just felt like he had that slippery slope down into, like, maybe he was doubting himself again. Maybe he was picturing the front page of the Daily Mail or the Sun or whatever, and then kind of lost that confidence a little bit.
I feel that way whenever I picture the front page of the Daily Mail.
Well, yeah, as well you should. But you know what I mean? That it felt a little bit like, it felt somewhat that it was the players being like, here's an opportunity, but also a big part, like, man, I don't want to hear more about how we're not good.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it did, but at least the thing was they weren't losing to Iceland. It was more just we're expected to win this away qualifier, which is the hardest game of the group, right?
Yeah.
It's a higher standard. So that's the reason I'm kind of optimistic about it. It's like they placed expectations on their own shoulders to win the game and then got it done.
Yep. But it's still like and maybe we should talk about, let's get first to how they got it done, and then we'll talk more about the metaphysical, theoretical ideas behind winning in Slovakia. But yeah, so, I mean, because it felt like it was going to end 0-0, right? I mean, England had chances. You had the great Adam Lallana, like, turn and shot that hits off the post. You had a few other opportunities. Who was it who was called back for offside? Was it Theo Walcott's goal ruled offside?
Theo Walcott
that
scored.
Maybe wasn't offside?
Did you know? I'm really sorry. I've forgotten who it was. Someone tweeted it. Oh, I think it was Guy Edwab. Tweeted it to Scott Zawadzki, official referee consultant, who took a look at that goal. And essentially, I think what Scott said is the referees thought that Sturridge played the ball off of the Slovakian defender.
No, I think it was the other way around. I think what he was saying is that if they ruled it offside, it's because they thought when the ball came off the Slovakian defender, it then hit Daniel Sturridge again, is I think what he was saying. But if it didn't hit Daniel Sturridge, then he should have been ruled onside.
Okay, here's exactly what he said.
Okay,
so,
you got it?
Slovakia in white, England in red, okay? Scott says, if White played the ball off Red's foot to Shooter being Walcott, offside. If White played the ball direct to Shooter, it should be a goal.
And for me, from the replays that I saw, watching them again, as we do about 40 times, it looked to me like it came directly off of Slovakia and went straight to Walcott. To me, that should have been a goal.
I agree, but I also understand that it's easy to see that after a couple of replays. In the moment, it could easily very much look like Sturridge played that ball through to Walcott.
Yeah, and this is one of the few times when I needed the 40th replay to really make my mind up. Like, the 39 were inconclusive, and then 40 I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure it went through. So yes, I totally understand why he was called offside, especially when you've got a Slovakia crowd that probably aren't going to be particularly hospitable to their Serbian referees if that call goes wrong.
And weirdly, I think what the keeper does next is the biggest mistake of the game.
How so?
He tried to kill the game from there, because that was like 90th-ish minute, right? We're just entering the 4 minutes of added time. The keeper goes down and calls the trainer on, sits there. And it wasn't a real injury because he was pouring water on his own legs as if that was a medical treatment.
Yeah, just before we started recording, there was I forget what it's called. It's on Reddit. It's called like the miracle foot cure. And it was in the Poland-Kazakhstan game. I think there was a Kazakh player down, like, rolling on the ground, writhing in pain. And a Polish player walked up and, like, nudged him with his foot. And the Kazakh player immediately vaults back to his feet and, like, let's go, man. And it's like, oh, you're healed. And maybe one of Slovakia's players should have done that to their own goalkeeper just to get him back on his feet so you don't have that extra 30 to 45 seconds of injury time, which is when England score.
Right, yeah, they score in the time that's added on for that keeper wasting time.
4 minutes added on, Adam Lallana scores in, 94 or something?
Yep.
Yep.
So all he really did was give England time to get a drink and get some extra instructions from the bench.
Exactly. and I like to think, even though I know this isn't the case, I like to think that Sam Allardyce's big instructions in that final water break was shoot right at the goalkeeper. This whole time we've tried shooting away from him. Shoot it right at him and see what happens.
Make him pay for it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what Adam Lallana did.
Before we get to the actual goal, I want to talk about Sturridge's involvement.
Sure.
I was emotionally disappointed that it wasn't Jamie Vardy coming on for Harry Kane.
Yep.
But it kind of made sense when you think about, we talked earlier about how Vardy needs space to run into.
Yep.
but then Sturridge is maybe cleverer in tight situations. He's better at making space.
Yeah.
It kind of made sense, right? And it's a shame for Jamie Vardy, but I think there'll be times when we need Jamie Vardy, but there are times when you need Daniel Sturridge.
Yeah, like,
and I think Allardyce, again, made the right choice here.
Like meaningless Thursday night friendlies. Yeah, that's when you could have used Jamie Vardy. Yeah, I know. I think it was the smart decision. My favorite thing I saw throughout this game was multiple people on social media being furious that Sam Allardyce subbed in Daniel Sturridge instead of Marcus Rashford. That one made me laugh real hard. People are paying a lot of attention to this England roster. He is not with that team. But I think at first I was surprised as well. Like, Jamie Vardy made sense. You put him in, he's a great goal scorer. And then hearing Sam Allardyce say what he said, thinking about it more, it makes absolute sense that you would put in Daniel Sturridge because that's a situational substitution, and that situation merits Daniel Sturridge and not Jamie Vardy.
And speaking of making space in tight spaces, which is what England needed to do for that last 10 minutes, right? As Slovakia went backwards and backwards and backwards, Adam Lallana. Adam Lallana made space where there was none by receiving that low ball from Danny Rose. And I think he had definitely Pekarik, I think, in front of him, the right back, and another defender. And there wasn't space to shoot, but he just took those two tiny touches just to create enough space to get that left-footed shot away.
Yeah, and I've seen a couple different pundits praising him for just kind of having the awareness to know where he is in relation to the goal. I'm not sure he did. I think he definitely creates space to get the shot off. And I know I criticized his shooting throughout the Euros. I made fun of him in our last show, and here we are. We had a couple different comments about that on Twitter as well. But I think the joke kind of applies here as well, that it seems like maybe he had been like, I've been picking out the corners this whole time. I'm just going to try to put this one on frame. But it did have a little bit of that sort of, I've created a little bit of space, now I'm just going to hit it and pray. And maybe those prayers were answered.
And why not in the 95th minute?
Yeah, I mean, it's why be ponderous and take your time and try to pick out something crafty. Just smash it and see what happens. And what happened was a goal. I think the latest goal in World Cup qualifying ever.
I read that somewhere. It's certainly the latest in a game that I've run around my apartment yelling.
I especially enjoyed calling you a couple minutes after the game, and you answered with Adam Lallana fan club headquarters, I think, which is maybe why my documentation arrived so quickly, is because it was like a 3-mile bike ride for you to drop it off.
I put a word in for you.
I appreciate
that. I sent the Jimmy John's guys. I put it on one of their bikes.
But here's what I want to say though, because it did feel afterwards, and I imagine during, that you were very excited about what you were seeing. That it seemed like you were very positive about the stuff you were seeing on the field.
Yes.
And
even if it had finished 0-0, I'd have been reasonably happy with this performance.
And I found myself sort of seeing positive things and being more positive than what I saw a lot of social media doing, because I was sort of curious how people were reacting, and I kind of knew the answer before I even looked, and my theory was correct. But I was with people that I felt like it was a pretty boring half, that England didn't create that many chances, that they looked kind of ponderous, that there was a lot of those moments that we saw in the Euros where it was people putting their foot on the ball and kind of dribbling forward and dribbling forward and dribbling forward and then playing the ball backwards. And yet at halftime, I kind of found myself wanting to be positive because I knew you were going to be positive.
You should have matched my positivity.
Well, I felt like it, because of what I didn't want for it to be was for me to call you and be like, man, that was boring. And you'd be like, what are you talking about? It was the best game ever. It was the most captivating thing I've ever seen. So I'm just curious, like, do you think there is for you some, like, a little bit of, you want this to work, you want the Sam Allardyce appointment to work, and so you're willing to see things through rose-colored glasses? Or do you think it really was a stronger performance than maybe some people are saying, and overall a comprehensively good performance?
I think the reason for my sort of inveterate positivity towards England is, obviously I'm an England fan. Yep. I want every England manager's reign to work out, right?
Yep.
But I think I look at it as, what does this manager do? And do I see the thing that he's good at being implemented with this team, right? So there was no way that England were going to go away to Slovakia in Sam Allardyce's first game and look like they were coached by Bielsa or Guardiola or like Kevin Keegan Newcastle in the mid-90s, right? It wasn't going to be some crazy exciting. So that's,
man, that dropped off real fast.
We're just
Guardiola, Bielsa, Kevin Keegan.
I'm just talking about sort of exciting attacking teams, or like heavy possession teams, or some style of football that is very non-Allardyce.
Yeah.
Or Allardycean would be the correct term, right? What I've been banging on about, I think for the last 2 weeks, about a successful Allardyce team, is a team that has figured out the plan, figured out a way to nullify the opposition, figured out what their best routes to goal are, figured out some effective set pieces. And I saw most of that in the first half and throughout the second half, right? So all of that made me sort of feel really positive about this performance under Allardyce, because it was the positive Allardyce things that I was looking for. Does that make sense? Like that I'm looking for those things as opposed to just expecting to see an Australian fight a tiger.
Well, first of all, lovely callback. Second, I would say, no, that all makes sense to me, because the way I thought about it at halftime, because I really did ponder this for like the entire, you know how I am. I'm prone to pondering. I thought about it for most of halftime. And what I came away with was the idea that there were all the jokes that came about when Allardyce was appointed, that like, oh, he's been very successful at keeping, lower to middle clubs up in the Premier League, and that's what England are in the world. And that was like the joke, right? But it's kind of true. And it felt like that today, that like maybe this was the first game of many in which pundits and fans are going to have to get used to the idea that like, no, we're scrappers, and that's what we're going to have to be, and we're going to have to be really defensive and really well organized and know our marks and know our system, and then we snatch an away goal or late goal, and then we get the result.
Yeah, and then England punches above its weight instead of consistently below its weight.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, then you're still going to face the, the kind of allegations of you should be doing more, you should be playing better, you should be beating these teams more when you play the weaker teams in the group. But it still makes more sense to me to kind of, as you said, play to the identity of your coach and what he wants you to do. And if that means sit back and defend, it means sit back and defend. But many pieces of silverware have been won by sitting back and defending. Yeah. And I don't see a big problem with that.
Well, I'd even say that England didn't sit back and defend. They just defended well. Like I was talking about with Stones and Cahill always step into the ball. Like everyone knew their role. Eric Dyer knew to sit in front of them and make sure he was a shield. Henderson knew to track Marek Hamšík. Yeah. Like there was a defensive plan. And that meant that they didn't have to defend like desperately so deep. It wasn't John Terry heading the ball away and the ball coming back in, and John Terry heading the ball away and the ball coming back in.
Yeah, I misspoke there. That's my fault. I guess what I meant was more so that it makes more sense to have like a very well planned defensive system in place, and then less so, give the ball to Harry Kane and we'll see what he can do. Like right, that, I guess I feel like I'm more okay with that than trying to draw up these elaborate plays all over the field and have this whole elaborate system that maybe the players can't figure out in their 1 week of training. Yeah,
so instead the plan was, all right, Harry Kane, go elbow to elbow with Skirtle and Dorica and wear him down for a whole half.
Boy, and take some punishment as well.
Yeah, big ice bath, big ice bath for Harry Kane.
I would say so.
There's one player we haven't talked about, Taylor, and he was the captain, Wayne Rooney. Because he seemed to be the focus of the negativity from England fans throughout this game until England scored. I saw more than one tweet about how he's not creative enough and he's finished and he shouldn't be playing anymore. And to me, it was another like under the radar good Wayne Rooney performance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wouldn't go that far, to be honest, because I was one of those people who was sort of like, really? Because Sam Allardyce said that he talked to Jose and that Jose told him, Jose, but whatever, told him.
Does Allardyce say Jose?
Yeah, that's what always makes me laugh. I feel like he almost does it deliberately. He calls him, talk to Jose. And he said he was going to play Rooney the way Jose Mourinho has been playing Wayne Rooney for Manchester United, and that they're going to try to have him in a position in which he's more comfortable because he'll be playing it for club and country. And then in the first game, he seemed a little bit more like he was going right back to what he was doing under Roy Hodgson, where he was dropping deep and he was kind of all over the place. And sometimes, not Lallana, sometimes Henderson was ahead of him. Sometimes he was ahead of Henderson. It felt like he was kind of all over the place in that midfield, including dropping deep. And so it wasn't quite the like, oh, he's staying high, he's playing off of Harry Kane, he's moving the ball from left to right, he's getting opportunities. But it did feel like that happened more and more as the game progressed. And I think that is maybe the part to be optimistic about.
And wasn't there a quote from Allardyce after about how, Rooney is a very intelligent player and he knows how to find the game? I'm paraphrasing here, but, I let him just go out and find it where he wants to find it. And that's why I think in the first half, he was technically the number 10 and therefore playing just underneath Harry Kane.
Yeah.
But he didn't go and stand just beneath him. He would come back into central midfield, like one, to get more numbers in there, and two, to make sure he got the ball, right? And as England sort of dominated possession more in that final 20 minutes, he could then get farther and farther forward and be more and more involved. So I feel like that's why I feel like it's a sort of low-key good performance from Rooney.
So you deleted that whole 3,000-word essay you'd written about how Wayne Rooney needs to retire?
I have never written that essay. And let me tell you, if anyone's listening to this and doubting it, just think about that goal. It's a Danny Rose cross. and it's an Adam Lallana finish. But the guy that receives the ball in midfield, like he comes and demands the ball, takes it off, I think of John Stones or Cahill, and then he's the guy that turns and looks and finds Danny Rose and sends him away down that left wing. He orchestrates the beginning of that move. It's the captain, it's number 10, it's Wayne Rooney.
He also, like, in the span of when I heard somebody, like, talking, I think it was one of the commentators was talking about how he was dropping deep again. Like, he drops deep, turns, and then plays what I'm just going to, from now on, call a Rooney ball, and you know what I mean by that. He plays like a 60-yard Rooney ball into the path of, I think, Lallana, or maybe it's Sterling. And it's just like, yeah, but that's why he drops deep, is so he can get the ball and play an inch-perfect ball to spring an attack. Like, that also makes sense to me why you would want him doing that, because he seems like one of the few players on the team capable of playing that type of ball with that level of skill.
And do you remember that crazy-ass ball that he played through for Walcott? And Walcott was offside, but it was a beautiful ball that cut through through the middle of 5 defenders.
Yeah,
there's that kind of stuff from Wayne Rooney. And I think his experience and his talent, and even weirdly his temperament at this point, makes him the ideal guy to keep playing in that number 10 role.
Yeah, and if you haven't read it, I suggest you go on Instagram. Don't read the comments, but read David Beckham's Instagram about Wayne Rooney, because I guess Wayne Rooney became, the most capped outfield player? Is that correct?
Oh, I did see that headline. Yeah, I didn't really follow it, but yeah.
And he was basically just saying, like, and for all of you who are saying he should retire, like, you've never played international soccer. Like, there's no, I think his line was that, like, there's nothing that I can compare to walking onto, like, the pitch at Wembley wearing an England jersey. And if I could, I would do that, like, every day. So, like, I totally understand, like, you're basically saying, like, you shouldn't retire, you should do that until you can no longer run. And so, I think that sentiment, reading that just before the game started, helped me feel a little bit more positive about Wayne Rooney, because I think I have been down on him a little bit in seasons past.
So obviously we're up on England at the moment. I think maybe me a little more than you, but that's because I'm very excitable. I
think only about England, weirdly. You are generally far more, I think, rational. I think I tend to be, as the conspiracy theories would suggest, the one who's a little bit more emotional. But I think when it comes to England, you definitely are a bit more optimistic.
It is the wellspring of my soccer fandom, is the 1990 World Cup. Like, England is the thing that got me interested in soccer, and I think I'm still sort of tied to it in that way, that a successful England team gets me super excited, and I always want it to happen. So I'm always willing to see it happen, maybe when other people are more just complaining about how the game's boring.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
And I think, number one, that makes you far more fun to watch soccer with and talk about soccer with, because if you were just, like, moaning all the time, wouldn't be great. Number two, I would also say that one thing I appreciate is that you don't seem to do if you want to go with, like, the stereotype of the England fan, it's irrational optimism, then then falling into complete despair, and then irrational optimism again. And I think you have rational optimism, and then I wouldn't say it's despair, but it's definitely that sort of, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed in you. Like when they really struggled and played so poorly at the Euros, you weren't angry. I never heard you rant. I never heard you curse even. I think it was just mostly like, oh, I really thought this was going to be good. And so again, I appreciate that, because it is rational optimism to rational sadness, but it's never irrational in either way.
If anyone has a different take, and I appreciate that, thanks, Dan.
Yeah, buddy.
If anyone has a different take about England, you can email it to us, contact@totalsoccershow.com.
Or just Daryl at totalsoccershow.com if you want to be really negative. Your choice.
England's next game is a World Cup qualifier. October 8th, they host Malta at Wembley. That may be the game. If you want to see a bit more excitement and a few more goals, that may be the game, because Scotland just beat Malta 5-1, and Scotland are currently top of the World Cup qualifying group.
They sure are.
And then England go away to Slovenia 3 days later, October 11th.
It's a big month. It's a big month for you guys.
England not the only team playing World Cup qualifiers.
This is true.
We recently reviewed the USA's 6-0 win over St. Vincent and the Grenadines. This Tuesday, they host Trinidad and Tobago in Jacksonville, Florida.
And it's all to play for if they concede 6 and Guatemala score 6.
So that's it. Yeah, we I was hoping maybe either qualification was secure and we could definitely just relax, or it was all to play for and like we had to avoid defeat, or we had to win to qualify for the World Cup.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's that weird, like, almost but not quite, right?
Yeah.
Can you explain the mathematical situation to people, please?
Sure. So I think it's basically the United States advance if they win, advance if they draw. If they lose, they would have to lose by enough, because I think the goal difference right now, which is the next tiebreaker, is I think 12 is the difference. So basically that's why I said they would have to lose by 6 and Guatemala would have to win by 6. And, and even then they might go through on whatever the next tiebreaker is.
Yeah, so Guatemala 3 points behind the US, but 12 goals behind. So it's very unlikely that Guatemala make that swing, even if they give a real beating to St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
That's it. I can't wait for everyone to get super freaked out when at halftime the United States is losing 1-0 and Guatemala's up like 7-0. It's gonna be real fun.
So Klinsmann had said if qualification was assured, that he would play some of the less experienced players. You'll notice I deliberately didn't say kids, because we heard from David Hopkins, who didn't like us using the word kids, about guys like Caleb Stanko, I think he was in his early 20s, which is fair. We take your point, David. What do you think Klinsmann's going to do? Will he treat this as if we've qualified and give, say, Rubio Rubin a run out? Or will he treat it as a game that we can't lose 6-0 and therefore we're not taking any risks?
I think I'm going to take the cop out and say somewhere in between, but I'm going to say he's going to err on the side of we need to win this game.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense.
Because I think even first of all, I don't think he necessarily cares about headlines and what the media says about him, because his job is pretty well secure. That said,
well, not if there's a 12-goal swing.
Well, yeah, but if you lose to Trinidad, if you draw 0-0, and you kind of you can see the headlines being like USA limps into the hex, right? Because it's finishing second. It's not looking that convincing in a couple of different games. So.
Oh, yeah, sorry. It's worth noting that the US needs to win this game to finish top of the group to go into the hex. Otherwise, but it doesn't actually matter except for schedules.
Right, exactly. And maybe the narrative. And so there's that to consider. There's also the fact that like he did say, if we've secured a qualification, then we'll see. But if we haven't, then, we're going to stick with what works. Since they haven't, I feel like he could then, if asked about it in the press conference, he can say, yeah, I wanted to kind of like make sure that we got there. That was what's most important. Like you can hear that soundbite, right? Like we never take anything for granted. We play all 90 minutes and we wanted to make sure that this game was, qualification was secure and we couldn't risk anything. And so I can see him saying that as Darlington Nagbe quietly weeps in the locker room.
Well, shall we look into what we think would be our ideal starting 11?
Sure. Now, are we doing?
Before we do, it's worth noting first of all that DeAndre Yedlin and Matt Beasler have exited the roster for two very different reasons. Yedlin got a yellow card for that shirt pull.
Can we talk about that for a second? Because speaking of rational and irrational, I found myself irrationally furious about that.
Yep.
Like, I mean, so it's basically, it was I think it was the first half, right? Mm-hmm. It's basically he tries to break up a play by obviously pulling back a jersey of a St. Vinny's player. I'm just calling them all different nicknames at this point. Gets the yellow card. I mean, it's right in front of the ref and then complains about it, but I mean, clearly pulls the jersey. It's always going to be a yellow card, and because of that accumulation, he's suspended. Was suspended in the Gold Cup for doing stupid things, conceded a penalty in the Gold Cup. I mean, or not Gold Cup, excuse me, Copa America Centenario. So it just seems like another example of him kind of doing stupid stuff when he absolutely did not need to do stupid stuff.
Yep. And so he's going to miss this game. Also missing this game,
Angry.
Matt Beasler. Mm-hmm. Matt Beasler has exited the squad because of the birth of his first child.
Yeah, and Matt Beasler, you got a time. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not angry at all about Matt Beasler. That's wonderful. Congratulations, Matt. Sorry to interrupt, but if past is precedent, he should definitely make public that where they're registering to get gifts for the baby, right?
Yes. He could make out like a bandit.
Yep. He has done already. Why not try again?
So we also have Michael Bradley coming in because his suspension is over. Mm-hmm. So Bradley is available for selection. And Michael Orozco-Fiscal coming in. Sorry, Michael Orozco coming in because his suspension is also over. So that's your new roster. Mm-hmm. I've also, Taylor, gone back and looked at Trinidad's 2-2 draw with Guatemala. That's what happened in the most recent game. And I've picked my lineup sort of based on the idea that Trinidad are a decent team and we should take steps to make sure that we can beat them, right? You cannot roll Trinidad over. It's a proper team we're playing against. It's a team that's going to the Hex. It's a team that we'll be facing again, hopefully, if we go to the Hex.
Or do you do some rope-a-dope stuff and like look completely shambolic so that they get a sense of overconfidence, and then you have that in your pocket when you play them twice in the Hex?
I'm going to say no.
Yeah, you don't do that. That's a terrible idea. All right, so with that in mind, are you going to go with the formation the U.S. has been utilizing, or are you going to do something different?
Yeah, I'm expecting, and I think I would choose to go with a basic 4-4-2 with one holding midfielder, one attacking midfielder.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think we're about to say some very similar things. And I would say, with just adding in the point that this is kind of what we would like to see, but mostly it's what we think Klinsmann will do. Is that fair to say? Or are you doing what you think?
I'm doing the classic Total Soccer Show mix of realism and optimism.
Right. Okay. So
Do you know what I
then,
mean? Like, it's like best case scenario Klinsmann is what we're selecting.
yeah, okay, I'll take that. And with that in mind, I think that if we go with that 4-4-2, which I think, you've got the same basic thing I do, I think you probably are going to see Tim Howard start this game.
We know that, right? Hasn't Klinsmann said that Gazan would start the St. Vincent game and Tim Howard would start the Trinidad game?
That I did not know. I kind of just assumed that he would basically give it to Tim Howard because of the situation.
I can't remember if I've imagined that or if I've read that, but I think that's what's going to happen.
I don't. If that's the case, I don't know if I love that.
No, me neither. I think there was a thing in England in the 70s when they went back and forth between Ray Clements and Peter Shilton, and we didn't qualify for the World Cup.
And I know that might not seem like much. But I remember when I was in college and I was a place kicker in football. Shocking that a soccer player would become a place kicker, and we would do that sometimes. The coach would be like, "Actually, this guy's gonna kick this game." It sucks. It's really, really, really hard. Mm-hmm. So like, even if it is like, oh, he's gonna go take the kicks in this half because we're beating this team by 30, it still is sort of like, oh, okay, cool. I guess you're saying like I'm surplus to requirements right now, and so like it can definitely be a much more emotionally frustrating thing than people might realize. And especially...
It's also if you're building a defensive unit, if you've got any hopes of building a solid defensive unit, you want as many reps as possible with the same goalkeeper, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I imagine people get used to it as well. This is, again, I'm going emotional. See, we switch back to our usual roles. But also if you're going to go like the emotional aspect on it, that like, I feel like if I'm if I'm Brad Guzan, I would probably rather start the game in front of the packed house in Florida than the cricket field in St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, but regardless, it probably will be Timmy.
I just realized the analogy I used was England goalkeepers from the 70s. The actual analogy should be Casey Keller, Brad Friedel, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They do more or less the same thing back and forth. Yeah. But by the time the US went to the World Cup in 2002, I think they had to choose.
Yep. And choose wisely, they did.
In hindsight, right?
Yeah.
All right, so the four defenders ahead of Tim Howard.
Yeah.
Two of them are missing from the last game, DeAndre Yedlin and Matt Beasler. So there are definitely holes to fill in this back four. Do we agree that Jeff Cameron is going to start at centre-back and hold his space there?
We do, except so many people I've seen are saying that he's going to slide over to right back, mostly because he's been in camp and Orozco hasn't. Yeah. I don't buy that. I think if you're looking at consistency and you want some sort of continuity, you're going to keep Jeff Cameron as your center back, especially against a Trinidad team that has that guy Kenwin Jones, who's kind of good in the air and kind of physical. Yes. You probably want at least one center back who's kind of already in like playing form and like mentally sharp.
So since we're talking about the defense, I'm going to tell you what I saw from Trinidad's attack in that Guatemala game.
Sure.
They played with, Kenwin Jones, big Kenwin Jones, new signing for Atlanta United, who'll be playing there in 2017. He's the big target man up front. If you're not familiar with him, he has spent many years in the Premier League. He is genuinely dangerous in the air and with his feet, right? Mm-hmm. Double threat.
Yep.
I noticed Joevin Jones, the Seattle Sounders left back?
Yep.
In the last game, he played left wing.
Mm-hmm. And scored, right?
He scored twice.
Yep. I knew he scored the equalizer. Did not know he scored the first one, too.
Yeah, so it's a lot of sort of pace and attacking intent, and I kind of would have loved to see him up against DeAndre Yedlin.
Oh boy.
Underneath Kenwin Jones is Kevin Molino of Orlando, and to the right was Cordell Cato, who I can't remember who he plays for. Mm-hmm. And then coming off the bench, you've got Levi Garcia, who's in the Total Soccer Show scouting network, 18-year-old left winger, plays for RZ.
I'm gonna go from like a US Homer standpoint and say, let's just hope he stays on the bench, shall we? He's real good.
Yeah. And here's what I saw them do. This is really interesting. So they didn't just push Kenwin Jones up as high as possible and aim balls at him. Mm-hmm. Kenwin Jones would come deep. So he would come for, like, say, goal kicks or long balls out of Trinidad's defense. Mm-hmm. Kenwin Jones would come behind Jones, Molino, and Cato and win the ball and flick it onto them and then go and join the next wave of the attack, which is kind of, it's not revolutionary, but it's a slightly different use of a target forward, right?
Yeah.
He's not like back to goal, knocking it down to them. He's flicking it on and then getting involved in the play afterwards.
This alarms me.
Why does it alarm you?
Because that fluidity could definitely be a problem if he starts moving into the midfield and then a center back moves with him, or the United States tries to like man mark him. Yeah. Then you open up holes in your defense. So again, for that reason, I think that's why you have Jeff Cameron there to kind of police, control things, keep everybody organized, not let things get out of hand.
And who's alongside him?
I would like to see Omar Gonzalez because of that height, because I think he can handle some Kenwin Jones, but I have a feeling it's going to be Steve Birnbaum.
I also think Steve Birnbaum, but for the same reason. He has the height that
He
can
does.
go up against Kenwyne Jones.
6'4",
He's
6'5",
also,
I forget how big he is.
I don't know, but he's big, right? He's at least a competitor to Omar Gonzalez.
Yep.
But the big thing is, Steve Birnbaum is 25 years old, right? We treat him like he's some sort of newbie or rookie. He's really not, because he went through college and then didn't start in MLS till a little later. Like, if he's going to become a useful, regular US men's national team player through the Hex, through the World Cup, maybe, and he's a player I really, really like, he needs this test. Right, he needs to face a Kenwyne Jones in a CONCACAF World Cup qualifier, even if it's one where there's not everything on the line. I think it's a great game to give him that test.
All right, so there it is. I'll write down Birnbaum and I'll send it to Klinsmann. And then outside backs, I'm gonna stick with what worked against St. Vincent, because obviously that's the same thing as playing against Trinidad. And I'm gonna say Kellen Acosta on the left, and I'm gonna say Michael Orozco on the right.
That's what I have over here.
Not thrilled about that, but that's what I'm gonna do.
Well, I think similar to Birnbaum, it's a good test for Acosta after a positive performance against St. Vincent. It will be good to see him go up against Cato and whoever else Trinidad send down that right side.
So should we keep it going and see if we just have the exact same lineup? Because I'm betting we will at this point.
Well, here's what I have.
There's only one position that I'm not sure about that you're going to have.
Okay. My defensive midfielder is Michael Bradley. My number 6 is Michael Bradley.
You've changed it on me already.
So here's why.
So you're going to drop Kyle Beckerman.
Yes, and there are 2 reasons for this. First, this is where I want Bradley to play, right? I think this is where he's most effective for the US, because now we have these sort of more creative central midfielders like Kleshton, like Nagby, like maybe a little bit Bedoya, that we can play ahead of a defensive midfielder instead of a Beckham and Bradley partnership, right? So I feel like, even though I genuinely love Kyle Beckerman, I really do, I think he's a magnificent guy and a magnificent player, I feel like we need to have a sort of it's not you, it's me conversation with him. You know what I mean? Like, I've moved on and I want more from this relationship. I want some more creativity in midfield, right?
Yeah.
So there's that aspect to it, and you got to let him down gently, because
it's not you. It's just the cruel passage of time. Is that a better way to put it?
Yeah. That is not a good way to break up with anyone. But
the ravages of time. No, people don't like that. All right, my mistake.
So the other aspect is, Michael Bradley is better in the air than Kyle Beckerman.
This is true.
So that thing I talked about with Kenwyne Jones coming a little deeper, I want a defensive midfielder that can challenge him in the air, so that those centre-backs don't get dragged out. And I think Bradley can at least give Kenwyne Jones trouble in the air, even if he doesn't beat him every time. Kyle Beckerman hasn't got the ups to get there.
Yeah, I like this. You've talked me into it, because I think I just kind of just assumed it would be Kyle Beckerman, because it felt like that was a Klinsmann choice, was to have kind of the safe defensive midfielder there, shield that back four, especially when you've got sort of some question marks about what Trinidad are going to try to do. Kyle Beckerman has that experience. But I think you're right that Michael Bradley has some of that experience, but also the physicality, also the aerial ability, and also the deep line playmaker abilities.
And again, this is like best case scenario. You may be right to assume it's Beckerman. And if it is, I'm not massively upset, because again, we love Kyle Beckerman.
All right, so who else have you got?
Then that leaves Fabian Johnson on the left mid, right? Because we're not having him as a fullback. And again, we've had this conversation several times. I don't fully trust him defensively for all kinds of reasons. I think he's much more useful as the left midfielder, putting passes through on the left.
Yeah.
That means no Christian Pulisic on the left. I'm kind of okay with that too.
It does. I wanted to pause for a moment, because I agree with you. It's going to be Fabian Johnson. And since I agree with you, let's talk about something else. Do you feel at all like Fabian Johnson is probably the least pleased whenever the U.S. Soccer reconfirms its commitment to Jurgen Klinsmann? Because it seems like we frequently see him looking frustrated. When he subbed out against the Vinnies, we saw kind of visible frustration. There was the thing about he was injured and didn't want to play. Like, I get the feeling that he's a player that could like easily kind of fall into Klinsmann's bad side, and vice versa. Klinsmann could not be his favorite person.
I agree. I think it's kind of a marriage of convenience in many ways. Like, I think there's probably a bit of tension, but they're okay enough with each other. Like, they're never going to be hanging out when they don't have to. But I'm sure they could get through a conversation. Put it that way.
Yeah, Fabian Johnson also feels like one of those players, because what I was initially thinking was that he kind of could be one of those guys that like just slowly falls out of the graces of the manager and stops getting selected. But he also has all the hallmarks of a you don't know what you've got until it's gone sort of player, where like he's not anyone's favorite Bundesliga player, I don't think, except for maybe Fabian Johnson and his parents. But once if he were to stop getting called, it would be sort of like, wait, what? Why wasn't he there? Why isn't he there? He needs to be there. So I think he'll, always obviously continue to get called, but he just strikes me as a guy who kind of consistently, visibly is not the biggest fan of Jurgen Klinsmann.
Well, I think it's because he has to keep playing fullback, right?
Yeah.
And it's not his best position. It's not his favorite position.
Yeah.
It's like he's literally trying to do the things that he likes to do, but he's having to do it from like 30 yards farther back than he likes.
I wonder if it's also, and I know it's not, but I wonder if it's also something like when I was a kid, we wore like the same jerseys for like 10 years straight, and they were like super outdated, super 80s, like polyester. And I remember other teams would kind of make fun of us about them. And I do wonder if like he goes back to the Bundesliga and his Bayern teammates are like, really? Still with Klinsmann? That's still happening, huh? All right. Do what you do, man. Do what you do.
All right, who else you got in midfield then, Taylor?
I have got on the right wing. Initially I had it as Beckerman, Bradley ahead of him, Bedoya on the right.
Yeah,
and
I could see that happening.
So I'm just going to stick with that. I'm going to say Bedoya on the right. Who have you on the right wing? Do you have Bedoya or do you have Zusi?
I've optimistically got Darlington Nagby.
Ooh, okay, cool. I like that. It's not going to happen, but I like that.
Why isn't it going to happen?
Because I've just decided to stop hoping that it happens. And that really is my honest answer, is that it seems like that's not a player that Jurgen Klinsmann wants to start. Maybe he still is trying to figure out where he best fits within the team. Really, I know this is a silly way to explain this, but it really might be that he is kind of so multifaceted that Klinsmann doesn't really know where to utilize him and maybe prefers to wait and see where he needs him. But it just seems like he's not a player that Klinsmann sees as a starter yet. And so for that reason, I don't think he starts. And with that said, he's now going to definitely start.
I think it's about aggression. I've got this feeling that Klinsmann is like pushing this aggression message, and he did it all through the Copa America. And Nagby doesn't quite, doesn't quite have the aggression for him.
I see. Okay, so you've gone optimistically with Nagby, and then who have you gone with as your? Have you gone with Kleshton then as your attacking midfielder?
I basically haven't decided. I thought I would have decided by this point in the conversation.
Is that why you switched to me to ask me who I had? Because that's what I feel like you did.
Yeah, my sheet says Kleshton/Bedoya.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think any of those are options, Bedoya or Kleshton in the middle, or maybe Bedoya outright and Kleshton up top or Nagby up top. And I wouldn't really mind any of them because I think Bedoya has proven his worth and proven that he can play there. I've seen some people saying that they would like to see Bedoya and Bradley switching back and forth in their defensive and attacking roles. I don't want to see that.
Yeah, those people need to re-examine what they're looking at.
They've forgotten that Brazil game when Alejandro Bedoya did not do well as a defensive midfielder. And
then Willian still rubs his hands with glee every time he sees Bedoya's face.
Yeah, I think that's how he motivates himself. He just looks at a picture of Bedoya. And that's what he pictures on everyone else's face. And then I think I wouldn't mind seeing Kleshton because of what we saw against the Vinnies, where he can pick out those passes. He can take that really quick first touch and then the really smart second touch to play those good through balls. He can control things in the middle. So I wouldn't mind seeing him get a start and be rewarded for his performance against St. Vincent and the Grenadines, as well as his performance in Major League Soccer.
Okay, so there are two names that we haven't really considered for inclusion in the starting 11. And one of them is Graham Zusi, who started at right midfield in the last game and finished at right midfield. So why has his name not come up until I forced it?
Because I mentioned him very quickly when we were talking about right wing, but it's mostly because, for what you just said, he played the entire game against St. Vincent and the Grenadines. That does feel like a situation in which Klinsmann is doing this one thing for this whole game to do something different in the next game.
See, I still think that there's a thing of like Klinsmann has guys that he loves for their work rate and like their mix of work rate and potential like delivery. And I feel like Zeus is one of them. And it wouldn't surprise me if he's basically the Zardes when Zardes isn't there. He's the guy that just Klinsmann trusts to go through the work and provide enough offensive threat. Yeah,
I can see that, but I can also see Klinsmann that being one of the positions in which he rotates because he has he basically has an idea of what Zusi's going to do. He knows what Zusi will do when wearing the U.S. jersey. So maybe he wants to experiment and see what other people can do. That said, if it is Graham Zusi outright, I'm fine with that as well. Because, and this is the biggest thing, is like I would like to see Darlington Nagby. I would like to see Christian Pulisic. I'd like to see a 4-3-3 or 3-5-2 or something crazy. But by the same token, going back to our conversations this summer, what you and I have said consistently is we want to see consistency. We want Klinsmann to stick with the lineup, to stick with like an approach to the game that then the players get familiar with. They know what they're doing. They can come in and play, right?
Yeah.
And so while I would like to see some change and some mixing it up, I also don't want to see that much change. I don't want to see all new faces in an all new lineup and an all new formation, because then it's like, what, really? We're just trying something completely different out of nowhere? Like, I'd like to see one or two changes, but mostly the same thing.
Well, here's the other guy we haven't really considered for the starting 11, Christian Pulisic. And I
Yep.
feel like most people, if they could choose one player to start, especially after his 2 goals against St. Vincent, they would want to see Christian Pulisic start a CONCACAF qualifier for the US. So why didn't either of us think it was a possibility?
Well, it may be a possibility, but I think Klinsmann wants to use him on the left as that impact substitute. I don't think if he's going to play Kellen Acosta at left back, then if he's going to play Fabian Johnson at left midfield, then I don't think Christian Pulisic beats him out yet. And so I think it's going to be Fabian Johnson's to lose, and maybe Pulisic comes in as a substitute. You could see him as that attacking midfielder. That could be very interesting because he is very good on the ball, very good presence, very good at picking out passes as well. So maybe you could see him as an attacking midfielder with Michael Bradley underneath, but also against a physical opponent in a game that Klinsmann will probably want to win the group moving into the Hex. I think maybe you use Pulisic as an impact substitute.
And so this element that his performance against St. Vincent is based on the idea that he's this like fresh, lively 17-year-old that comes on against some really tired St. Vincent legs.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a different performance if he starts the game. It's not as if he scores 6 goals because he played the entire game, because he scored 2 goals in the last 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Right?
So
but before we move on to the forwards, my prediction, my like pessimistic prediction is that it's Zuzi on the right, Johnson on the left, and Beckerman and Bradley in central midfield.
Yeah, but I think you've talked me out of Beckerman in midfield. I think that's another one that maybe he plays the full 90 against St. Vincent to not play the full 90, or to play most of the game. I think he played the full 90.
Yeah.
And then you give him a break for this game. So I wouldn't be surprised by that change. And then I would be surprised if it's anybody but Bobby Wood and Josie Altidore.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it looked like it clicked mostly. I was mentioning that I thought the US looked far too spread against St. Vincent at times because Wood and Altidore like stood up top, and then the midfield was like almost literally half a field away.
Yeah.
I was a little worried about Altidore not coming deep enough to collect the ball.
Right.
I even saw, so this is after I'd had that observation, I think I read Matt Doyle, and maybe Matt Doyle's column, said that there's a risk that the new US formation is 4-4 big gap 2.
Yeah. Yeah, but again, that's what I'm talking about with I want him to stick. I would be really bummed if it's anybody but those 2 starting up top, because that was a problem. It was an obvious problem. But that's a problem that you work on in training for a couple of days, and you go out and you have the same formation with the same 2 people starting, and you see how they deal with it. And then if it's still a problem, then you can change it up. But I think far too often Klinsmann has tried so many different things that there's no way to learn if we've learned that lesson. And it becomes this weird rotating thing where it's like if there's 14 things that you make, like when you're cooking, and one of those things is terrible, it feels like you can easily like start cooking other stuff and not like fine tune that one terrible recipe. And then when it's time to make that terrible thing again, you're like, well, last time I think it was good. And then you go out and do it again and it's terrible. And you don't learn your lesson. Whereas if you keep cooking that thing, you learn how to do it properly. So I hope that he sticks with those 2 and that they've worked on who drops when and how to make better supporting runs, but how to stretch the defense as well. And then we see that impact on the field against Trinidad and Tobago.
It's also a more interesting test of this partnership, isn't it? To play against Trinidad and Tobago than to play again against St. Vincent and the Grenadines as the Altidore and Wood partnership. I think that's the only 2 times they've played together in that shape has been against St. Vincent home and away.
Yeah. I am now horrified of the idea of like Klinsmann and his staff like sitting around the hotel, just as you and I would, like kind of like, trying to figure out lineups and being like, what about Bedoya as a defensive midfielder? Have we done that before? I don't think so. It could work, right? I mean, he works hard. Yeah, let's do it. It could be a great idea. And
It'll
then
definitely taste good.
Yeah, right. Exactly. like, no, sugar doesn't go in spaghetti, and then it's a problem.
So, any other thoughts before we wrap this up, Taylor?
No, I mean, other than that, I'm excited because it's like a sort of pressure game, right? It's a game that has stakes, but it's not a nail biter. Oh no, we've lost to Guatemala. We better beat them this time, or we're in a whole lot of trouble. Yeah, it's sort of like, there's not such a big problem if they lose or draw, but there's still pressure there, so there will still be lots to play for, and it will still be an exciting game as a result.
That sounds good. All right, so that game is Tuesday night. It is 8:00 Eastern. It's in Jacksonville. It's on Fox Sports 1. The next Total Soccer Show will be a review of that game, right? It's Labor Day weekend. We've worked Labor Day. We've labored on Labor Day, more or less, yeah. But we're going to take Monday and Tuesday off. I guess Tuesday we'll be watching the game, right?
Yep.
So basically what I'm saying is no show on Monday, no show on Tuesday morning.
Yep. And
Okay.
and my final point, to the gentleman who I keep running into at the grocery store, whose name I forgot, and I apologize. I promise I have more than Total Soccer Show clothing. I've seen him twice now, and both times I've been wearing a TSS shirt. And I feel like I promise I'm not just constantly promoting my own brand. Maybe I should be, and maybe that's part of the problem, but I'm not.
Well, speaking of, how about we close this show with a quick
Sure.
mention for recent sponsors? First of all, if you want to buy a Fuji rebounder and have the fun that Taylor and I have had with a Fuji rebounder, they are doing a back-to-school special. The new website is www.playfuji.com, F-U-T-C-H-I, playfuji.com. You use a coupon Total Soccer Bonus, all one word, all lowercase. You will get $70 off a Fuji rebounder. This isn't one of those things where there are lots of podcast promo codes out there. That is the only code that will get you $70 off.
This is true. I have to say also, Daryl Grove, that I was doing some yard work today and I walked outside and it was like 78 degrees a little bit. And really one of my first thoughts was, this is Fuji weather. So I'm ready now. It's not 96,000 degrees outside. I'm ready to go.
All right, let's do it one more time next week, huh?
Sounds like a plan.
All right. Or if you would like to buy a scarf and show your support for your team, you can go to one of our other sponsors, Roughneck Scarves, RUFFNECK, scarves.com. Use coupon Total Soccer Show for 20% off any scarf in the Roughneck Scarf store.
Is plan. Is factual.
All right, Taylor, thank you for taking the time this Sunday Labor Day weekend evening to review England and preview the US with me.
Right back at you, buddy.
Listeners, thank you for listening. We will talk to you again after the US v Trinidad game.